AJ, Gabby, for having me join here. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. As an intro, I'm Bill. I've been doing this for a little over 20 years, and always good stuff there on this. Let me just get that slide going here. And really, what I want to talk about is really this how to go about doing it. Have you been doing it? Do you know, should you be doing it? Those kind of topics. And that's usually what I get on the first rounds. So really, I want to talk a little bit about surroundings, your SAP hardening, your surroundings. Is this real? Are people coming in? Hardening that SAP position, really looking at situations where, you know what? I need to configure it this way. I need to configure it that way. When you look at those positions, they're really more around that hardening where, there is no patch for SAP all, so you really need to look at it and kind of run it there. From you also got to look at those security patches. They come out every month, first Tuesday of every month, and you're really looking for when do I get them in? How fast do I have to get them in? How do I get them in? Things of that nature, really from that case. Next one is your custom code vulnerability. I feel like most of my customers, they're always bringing that custom code over, and you don't know what kind of vulnerabilities is in that Z code, that Y code, and even your vendors that are actually going through and looking at that, and they're like, "Well, did they program this correctly?" And then that last one and the bigger one is security monitoring, and that's really the key. Knowing what's happening in your SAP systems right now. Have I been breached? Have people been looking at that? So we'll start with this first one. Have I been under attack? The answer is SAP has been under attack for years. I'm going back to, the 21, about 300 systems out of every 1,500 have been breached. There's attacks where they're breaching them. There's been a lot of famous ones. 24, the numbers aren't quite out yet, but I know they were really big because it's really where the data is at. Like it's not like when SAP is getting breached because of the value of the data. It's the value of the commerce. The majority of the world's commerce goes through SAP. So the idea being is companies right now have to protect that data. There's a lot of bad actors out there, foreign states, things of that nature. And really what they want is your data. That's the value to them. They're not looking for to kind of hold ransomware or anything of that nature. They really find that data. There's been a couple of famous breaches. I was actually involved in the first two on that list, and I have worked with CISA in the past, where they're seeing more and more a situation where, hey, this is big, this is where it's coming. There was a survey done in 23 where we looked at what are the biggest threats. Ransomware did come up, but an unpatched systems was the second, and that's the really one I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we go through this. Now let's talk about the vectors, the attack vectors, and where they are and how they go about it. Like right now, what you need is those configuration vulnerabilities, things that you do in your systems. I switch this on, I switch this off, I move this right, I move this left, I give everybody SAP all, I take away everything, things of that nature. Those are things that you configure. Those are things that SAP, frankly, will not have a patch for. They give you that flexibility. And while that flexibility sometimes is great, it's sometimes not so great. And those things you need to understand what they are. The next one that's key is patch management. SAP does a really nice job of sending out those patches and getting that scenarios going. However, you got to go and get them going. You got to get them installed. SAP does a CVSS score, Common Vulnerability Score, and anything in those 9 and 8 scenarios, 10 you got to do today. You got to get them in a couple of weeks where you've got to look at how do I best manage that? How do I get them in? Which ones do I need to put in? Which ones do I not need to put in? Obviously, Security Bridge with our partners, they can help you with that, Cogent, but I want to make sure you understand that. The next one we see is that custom code vulnerability. I feel like a lot of my customers, they started off on ECC, some started off on R3, ECC, you're now in S/4HANA, and you got a lot of that Z code, that Y code coming over. And really, when you look at it that way and you see that, you're like, well, did I really program that? Like one things when I do an evaluation and we're going in and doing scans, we see unsecured code in a couple of ways. Authority checks get missed. You have scenarios where backdoor entries by username, SQL injections. We see a couple of those too. I'll walk a little bit through those. And that last one is that threat detection or that real-time monitoring. The 0 days, a lot of people like to call it. It's really the scenario where do you know what's happening in your system right now? So I come into our SAP system. I come in during a normal time, working time zone. I work in the East Coast. But say I come in at 2 o'clock in the morning and say I come in with an IP address that, isn't really mine or a terminal name that doesn't really suit my company's standards. And oh, by that way, that maybe that IP address is from somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Eastern Europe, might raise suspicions. The question is, do you even know that happened and how did I do it, right? So that's kind of really some of those things. Let's start off with that first one, hardening your security position. And really, I want to start with it's more than just SAP all or who can run Profile Generator. A lot of people say, oh, we got to make sure we have that, make sure we have this. Now, there's definitely some platforms out there. Obviously, Focus Run has that as well as the HANA guides. But really, we also look at from our tools, and you really need to look at things like communication channels, RFCs. Normally, if when I in the day when I was paid to do some pen testing and break into systems, I'd run through your development system to get to your production system. I'd never go directly at your production. And those are things you need to look at. What are those networks? Who's talking to what? File system access, SAP user trans directory. Oh, that was a gold mine to get in and get out from that perspective. Also, encryption. Got to start thinking about it both in transit and in rest, at rest. Um, from those scenarios, data masking is also and anonymizing is also very huge in that case. And then just let everybody know that you do know there is an adapter that you can put in to virus scan the files that are getting uploaded into SAP. Definitely something you got to look at. And again, those are the things you start a holistic program to start hardening and looking at those scenarios. Security patches, the known product errors. We all know that exists. SAP, as I said, they do a great job. Now, the kind of thing is, the scenario here is let's talk a little bit about Patch Tuesday. The second Tuesday of every month, SAP it cuts out all their patches for security. And I'm just talking about security here. And they come up with some good ones, and they rank them out. High, very high, which is what we also refer to as hot news, medium, and low. And for those hot news, they actually recommend about you get them in around 15 days, flat out, from development all the way to production. And that's kind of tough at times. You got to look at a few things. But I will tell you this, they'll give you that list, but the people trying to get into your systems, they know about these exploits too, right? So you've got to look at it's not just your old days when I was doing SAP years ago when I started this. It was like, oh, I can go in and I can do this patch here and this patch there, and I'll do it twice a year, 3 times a year, maybe. You've got to really, and I emphasize with my clients, you've got to split your security patches from the rest of your patches and kind of really think about what's the efficiency ones, what's the good ones, what are the functionality ones, what are the breaks versus what are the security ones. And really got to look at that. And the key is you got to make sure they're relevant for you. And you also have a detection plan in case you can't do it, right? So there'll be times where you know that medium and those highs, hey, I am going to let it ride, but do I have a detection plan? And you'll see here. But really the key, and this is something we do here at Security Bridge, is if I can't patch in those 15 days or those 30 days or those 90 days, do I have the ability to monitor if the exploit that patch is correcting? Can I discover it? Can I say I can't patch it, but I know if somebody's trying to exploit it, if somebody's trying to say doing something. So like an example here, there's a patch that came out, and what we do in Security Bridge, we have the capabilities of monitoring, which I'll talk about a little later in the presentation. And what that does is that gives me the ability of saying, if I didn't use patch, we'll say 2197532, if I didn't get to it yet, I really need to look at who's doing suspicious web calls, who's doing an HTTP call that I don't like the sync pattern on. Those are the kind of things you need to look at. And we capture that and we do that. We use aids like the security audit log would also help. But it's really, if you can't patch, you have to monitor, and you've got to monitor those exploits while you're waiting for the patch to come out, or waiting for the patch to come out and implement. A little freebie for everybody here. You can go to cloud.securitybridge.com. And what we do is we take all the patches, we call them advisories. We're a big partner, we're a development partner with SAP, and they ask us not to confuse with their terminology. So we call them advisories, but they're a one-to-one. And what you have is a scenario here where you can go in, take a look at them. Obviously, you would still have to download them through SAP. The one thing I want to let everybody know is while our tool and other tools will help automate that, you still have to follow the SAP processes for patching. But in that scenario, what we have here, and I've got a lot of customers who use this and get a lot of feedback on it, where they can give some explanations to management, to the technical teams on why the security team can communicate that and why you really need to patch these. Gives you a little bit more, what I'll say, more refined language, more English language that really helps and kind of does that. And then again, this is free. You just go right to that URL and take a look at it. Next one I want to come to is one of my favorites. It's custom code vulnerabilities. So if you're like a lot of my customers, especially if you've had SAP for a long time, you've got custom code on custom code on custom code. You got the Z code over here, the Y code over here. And also you've got your vendors, like, hopefully Security Bridge, but there's a lot of vendors out there that have their own custom namespace. And has anybody reviewed their code, right? Have you been reviewing the code that you're putting in, moving from your development to your QA to your production? A lot of people now have outsourced ABAP development. And the scenario is there. Have you been checking your developers to make sure they even understand what good code is, what process is? A lot of times I see this and it's not malicious. It's just basically, hey guys, you really shouldn't have put your username and password in here so you can bypass something. So from that perspective, and again, if they do it, you don't catch it, the people trying to break into your system will, for sure. And the things you really need to look at, is the missing authority checks. We see them all the time. Somebody has a transaction code and you just run it wide open. Not a problem there. That's common. Not good, but common. Backdoors are usually, you see them a lot more. When I started this process and looking at this, I would think nobody would put a backdoor in. I see it all the time. And a lot of it's code. What's happening is I see the developer was like, well, I don't have access to the QA system. So when I transported it up, I put it in there so I can do some debugging or help some people do that. And they were like, oh, that's not good. And then all of a sudden the transport goes to production and maybe somebody forgot to take that out before they moved it into production. And you see that a lot. Mass data deletion. uh, I've got all my clients have that, where they'll have a program in production and it's mass delete. Like, hey, let's zero out the trial balances. Let's zero out the accounting. Let's delete all the vendors because this was a go live program. And what they were doing is that go live program is, hey, we copied it out. We got it all set. We copied the client over. This is going to be our production environment. We just got to zero out all the data and reload it for go live. And then you see those programs in there and you see them with most likely missing authority checks, maybe not a T code in there. And some intern might just say, let's zero out the trial balances. And yes, I've had that happen. It's not a good thing. So you've got to really look at that. But more importantly, with that, I also want to talk about the preventive side of this. We do have the ability with Security Bridge to scan your code before in development, before you release it. So hey, the developer can scan it. They can go in, run a transaction code, one of our transaction codes, say, oh, it looks like I forgot to put an authority check in. Let me put that in. Or hey, I opened my SQL statement. Let me do that. My open cache clause. So you're looking at things like that. So you want to really start that process to prevent it before it goes up, right? We also have the ability to connect to the ABAP test cockpit. So from that scenario, what processes you have there, our rule set, since we are embedded in SAP, kind of takes in that into account. So what we're doing is we're just adding a layer, a very important layer in my mind, with regards to security on your code. Now, the other thing you're going to see is as you move your story to Rise, or some of you may go to Grow, very important here. You're going to start to get, you're going to hear the clean core, right? We got to get through clean core. We got to clean it up. So a lot of this kind of moves into BTP. And we obviously, and I'll talk a little bit about our monitoring, our detection around BTP. That's also very valid. But at the same time, some of the BTP containers are ABAP containers. They're standard declared. So you need to also be scanning those as well. So definitely some things you want to see there as well and kind of look at that scenario. Couple of things, again, just a little bit more, really looking at it. And again, the number ones, my backdoors, my source code injection. Directory traverse is another one we tend to see, keywords, and then the authority validation. So really looking at scanning that code holistically. And really the goal is to have a process in development to scan it before you put it in the transport, before you release it to production, before you release it to QA, test it in production. Those are some key things. And I do have a lot of customers who start off, they do the scan of the code and they're like, oh, I have all these problems in production. I've got to fix this. Yeah. But you're not going to, they're just going to keep coming back until you get that holistic position. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is that security monitoring. What's happening in my system right now? Because that's the one where I could have all the best code. I've got this, I've got that. But if if something's been compromised and somebody's in there and they're getting elevated rights, do you know it? And a lot of my customers, and they start this process and they look at this process and they work with their consulting firms, they kind of say, oh, I didn't know we should be doing this. And that's okay. A lot of people also look at it, well, what about the outer layer? What about, my network? And absolutely, you want to protect those. I'm definitely not trying to talk you out of that. But the idea being, as people are coming in and getting in and getting in, you need multiple layers of defense. And definitely you need one around where the most valuable data is. If you have SAP in your company, that's where it is for all sake. So really, the first thing you got to ask yourself, what's going on in my system? Have I been hacked? How would I know? What should I be looking at? What listeners, we call them listeners, should I be looking for? And I've got a few of them here. And really, failed logons from unknown accounts, unless it's kind of like B Oliver versus Oliver B, or BO versus OB, a typo, you can kind of catch those really quickly. But people will start hacking up some things. Um, Somebody doing debugging activity in production is usually one that we catch. Somebody does it with a firefighter, straight out. You start to see, what did they change from the program flow logic, right? Um, Turning on and off your logs. So hopefully, if there's one thing you're going to get out of this, is we should turn on your security audit logs. You should turn on some of the other logs, change logs in SAP, because if you don't log it, you can't capture it. Now, there are some ways. You can visit our website, securitybridge.com, and we kind of have some techniques on saying, how do I keep the noise down? I want to know the actual facts, and I don't want to kill my performance. So it's really small chunks. I'll give you the quick hit here. You want to constantly read it every 2 or 3 minutes. We're programmed to read it every 3 minutes. You can do it every 2 minutes, and that keeps your size down. And then obviously you want to do some things with data lifecycle jobs and things of that nature that really help move that. But in this day and age, if part of your team is saying, oh, we can't turn it on because of performance reasons, it's really not a good story. I've worked with law enforcement for years, and I've had that come up, and after a hack and during a hack, and it just doesn't go well. So really need to work on what the best way to do it. And obviously, myself, AJ, and other people reach out to us. We can definitely help you out with that as well. A couple of things we also see is with SAP, again, we don't necessarily see the ransomware attacks, the denial of services, the DDoS attacks. We tend to see the steal as much data as we can as fast as we can attack, right? And what we see there is that really downloading the critical tables. People are just, they want your data, right? If you're in SAP, you're in that ERP, they really want to capture the data. The foreign states, without going into all the names, they really are trying to get your intellectual property, kind of get a jump start on how they can get to be like you, right? From that scenario. And they see it through, some of those scenarios as well as, suspicious HTTP calls is one of the easiest ones I tend to see if I'm going to break through. But one of the other things you want to do is you want to really automate the actions on certain cases. Like, you want to be able to say, look, that's great, but if you're in production and I've got one user using multiple workstations, we call the affectionate 1094, and you want to know immediately in the middle of the night, this just doesn't happen, and they're coming from different IP addresses. You know what? I just want to stop it. I'm just going to lock them out. I'm going to drop their access immediately right now, tonight. If it's really important, they'll call the help desk. The help desk will have a message to say, go call the Security Operations Center, and they'll figure it out, right? They'll get it sorted if it's legitimate. I've seen this done a few times, and for some reason they never call. It's like the next morning you might get a ticket. Somebody say, "Hey, I was locked out," and we'll ask, "Well, what were you doing in the middle of the night?" And like, "What do you mean what I was doing in the middle of the night? It wasn't me." I said, "Exactly." So you tend to see you want to manage that compromise. You want to also, there's some times where we've kind of known we were possibly under an attack or there was suspicion of it. And really the other things you want to do is like, hey, if I know this is happening or if I know this user, I think I want to log everything they're doing immediately, trigger it, take a look at it, investigative reasons, right? There's times where I said if it's a lower risk, I'll run an investigation and do the understand what they're doing. Higher risk like this in the middle of the night from an IP address that might be from a foreign state I don't want to know about, or one of the great VPNs. People go, well, I'm in country X, but I'll VPN to country Y and then sign on in this server. I said, well, I know that address too. I'm not going to let you do that. Those are the kind of things you want to do. And again, that's the key. And it kind of really what we're trying to do here, and this is a lot of times I'll talk to my SAP security people and they're like, oh, wow, we don't do this. We never do this before. And I'm like, that's fine. You're going to start doing it now. And you're going to work with your cybersecurity, for lack of a better word, and the security operations center people. And those individuals, they know how to do it. And the SAP security people, up until, a few years ago, have really been, oh, I need to add a role to a user. I need to create a role using PFCG. Oh, I got to create the Fiori catalogs, right? Those kind of scenarios. And what we're seeing is the SAP security people understand SAP. They understand these concepts. And the cybersecurity or security operations center, for lack of a better word, is like, hey, what's SAP? And I don't understand it. So it really, hence the name of our company, Security Bridge. We try to bridge the two together to really be able to show you these are things jointly you really got to start looking at and start working on. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about where all this data is going, right? So from this perspective, what we do is we do some work on interface traffic monitor, we call it. And it's basically monitoring RFC connections. We are starting to monitor some of the HTTPs and all that stuff. But in this case, I set this up and I run this for my customers, and the first thing they'll say is, well, why is this system talking to that system? Or better yet, why is that laptop have a direct connect into my SAP production users, and they're pulling the data out of our production system? So like we had one example where I had a customer who somebody was was in production, downloading all these tables, downloading all their customer information, their vendor information. And it was one of the firefighter IDs. And we're like, okay, so obviously somebody's logging a firefighter ID. We're capturing the data. They're not doing quite what you think they're doing. Um, so the idea being is we had to determine where they were storing it. So when they were tracking the firefighter, we were tracking, well, the person is storing it on their OneDrive. And we had the name of the individual, the OneDrive, the file. We were able to turn it off. We were able to work with one of the other vendors to turn the directory off and all that stuff. So again, the idea being is that's how they're going to run it. And what's the validation? So really, it's that holistic approach. And this is one of those for sure. Where the data is going is going to be the key to bringing it all together. And this gets me to one of my last points here. Then I've got a couple more. And this is really, you need to be monitoring everything, not just production. Everybody says, oh, I just do production. Everybody's great. The auditors just look at production. Yeah, that's great. And I understand why the auditor's looking at it. But you really got to look at the holistic SAP landscape, your dev, your QA, your BTP accounts. I've set up more BTP accounts on security than I care to know. Those new SAP systems, those SAP cloud, those SAP web systems, SAP news, whatever, success factors, right? Also look at the web dispatcher and your SAP router, because that gets me a lot of my traffic. So you got to be looking at those, but you got to look at it holistically. Because again, I'm usually going to do a skip jump from dev to QA to production. You got to look, it tells the story, it moves it, and I can get the data that way as well, especially if you have a scenario where I look at the least path, which we do from a an RFC pen test, where I'm looking at how can I get to my dev to my production? What's the least amount of steps with the least amount of users? But really, the key thing is that holistic view, really being able to tie it all together. Because if I'm missing a patch, then I got to be able to do some threat detection. And if my code is bad and somebody runs it, I got to catch it at my threat detection. And if I don't have the right parameters and my password parameters are the wrong size, or my encryption files are out of date, I really need to be able to get that security and compliance situation, right? And the great thing about us, and a little bragging here in Security Bridge, is we're obviously certified by SAP. We are actually built in SAP for SAP. Where SAP is where we are, right? And that gives us that opportunity to get into the nuts and bolts a lot quicker, a lot easier, with a lot best time to value and security to value and the security to money, is what we say. And with that, just a few takeaways, just to let you guys know, people want in. It's not when, it's if you're going to get hacked, right? And SAP has become bigger and bigger every day on that because it just basically it's where the data's at. You've got to be monitoring what's going on. You'll learn more about your system than you'll ever imagine. You'll see things going on like, I never thought we'd do that, or why are we doing that? And some of the things are good. Some of the things you're gonna be like, really? Why did we think that was a good idea? Big one here is communication. I get this all the time, and I've been in situations where I've had the SAP security team, the SAP basis team, with the CISO of a company, with their security operations center, and law enforcement come in, and the first thing I see is the SAP people are saying, "Hi, I'm Bill," to the SOC people, "Hi, I'm Jane." They've never met before. They've been working in the same company, basically supposed to be protecting the information assets of the company, and they're talking to each other the first time. And management needs to understand that is a risk. We need to address that and communication holistically, including making sure management understands, like, hey, we got all this covered, but did you know? We all know SAP is where it's at. Are we doing anything about it? And that's really the key. So with that, that kind of ends my presentation. More than happy to take any questions and thoughts. I want to thank Kojit. Very appreciate the hosting this. Fantastic. And Gabby, I'll give it back to you.
Of course. Thank you, Oliver. Yes, so we do have a section here for Q&A, in case someone wants to ask something.
Hey, Bill, this is Srini. So yeah, it's a great session. I really loved the way you, like connected the technology aspects and as well as the business aspects. It's pretty clear and lucid to understand, and really enables enables the decision makers about what's so important, and especially the production cutovers and all. Yeah, there are so many contexts where we ignore these things. Yeah, thanks for a great session.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Kind words.
Thank you, Srini. All right. Ajay, do you have any questions or closing comments?
Yeah, we just wanted to thank everybody for their time. Bill, again, to Srini's point, thank you. It was a great information. I think you brought a lot of awareness to SAP. The fact that a lot of people feel the native tools are great, but I think you guys add a lot more value to it and simplicity. The biggest thing I think out of this whole thing is time to value, right? You've got a solution that's been proven, tested over time. It works, it's simplistic, and people can be confident that their SAP environment is secure. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I look forward to doing some more of these in the future with you.
Oh, fantastic. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
I think Hadi also wants to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. Hi, Bill. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you for joining us on this panel discussion today. Great to learn more about your product. I have a common question. This could be a question from other SAP GRC or security folks as well. It's an SAP partner product that you have a security bridge here. What is that the borders that you draw between the GRC and your product? How they both work together in the SAP landscape? Can you
No,
please
great.
explain on that?
No, great question. If you look at SAP GRC, what they're really doing is what I would say the segregation of duties is their prominent one with the access controls, if you would. They really look at, I can create a vendor or pay a vendor, right? They do have the firefighter access. We actually also have a firefighter access, but we really don't play in that segregation of duty space. That's kind of we're a complement to that. You look at some of the process controls where they may look at what were my financial tolerances on posting an invoice versus the PO, and how much will I take in an over, above, or under that purchase order. So those kind of business controls. We feel that as being a partner with SAP and working with SAP, we feel they do a phenomenal job at that. And we feel that this is something that we're really not into that space. So we really say the thing we do better is really around the cybersecurity, the monitoring, the threats, those kind of scenarios. And again, we work with SAP. We do have a lot of partnerships with SAP as soon as integration. So that's kind of how we play it. We feel that if SAP does something really well, we highly recommend it. Like, again, another example is with our code scan, we actually connect into SAP's ATC, the op test cockpit. They do a great model. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. And we feel that the same way with GRC. But GRC, it gives you that holistic position from internal controls, the segregation of duties, the business process controls, to your cyber defense. And this is where we come into the back end of that, or the front end of that, how you want to see it as a cyber defense, in or out or in.
Great, yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. All right, Bill. So I guess there are no more questions from the audience. Thank you so much for joining this webinar and your partnership with Cogent as well. Do you have any closing comments before we wrap it up?
No, just again, first of all, thank Cogent and everybody for attending. And the key is, it's the first step that's the hardest. First, you acknowledge, like, we've got to do something with cybersecurity. And at that point in time, I promise you, it'll look overwhelming, but it gets easier. And when you work with, some of our key consulting partners like Cogent, it's one of the things that it definitely can deliver it, and it's definitely worth your time. And I want to thank everybody for their time.
Thank you
Good
so
day.
much, Bill. I just want to let everyone know that in case you want to rewatch this, it's on YouTube. So you can always go there and watch it again. Thanks again, Bill. Thanks, Ajay. Thank you, Security Breach. And see you next time, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.